If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable emotional stories. The grand ballroom of the Dlamini Tower glittered with gold lights. A live band played softly as business leaders, politicians, and wealthy investors celebrated the 20th anniversary of Dlamini Harvest Group, one of Africa's biggest agricultural companies. At the center of it all stood Malik Dlamini. At 39, he was known as the billionaire who built schools, hospitals, and farms across the country. He raised his glass and smiled. "Tonight is not about me," he said. "It is about everyone who believed in our dream." The guests applauded. Then suddenly, the large screen behind him turned black. A red headline appeared. "Millions missing from Community Development Fund." The music stopped. The room became silent. A news reporter's voice echoed through the hall. "Evidence suggests CEO Malik Dlamini secretly transferred company funds over several years." People gasped. Another image appeared. Bank records, transfer receipts, and Malik's signature. His smile disappeared. "What is this?" he whispered. Board members stood from their seats. One of them looked at him with disappointment. "Malik, we had no choice. The authorities have frozen the accounts." Another stepped forward. "The board has voted to remove you as CEO immediately." The words hit him like a storm. Across the room, his cousin Victor avoided his eyes. His uncles and aunts slowly stepped away from him. Not one person defended him. Within minutes, reporters surrounded him. "Did you steal the money? Are you a criminal? Where did the millions go?" Flashes from cameras lit his face. Malik could barely breathe. Everything he had built was collapsing. He walked out of the ballroom alone. Rain had already begun to fall. He climbed into his car and drove into the dark night. Hours passed. The city lights disappeared. The roads became narrow and empty. Then, the engine died. The car rolled to a stop. Malik lowered his head onto the steering wheel. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to go. No company. No family. No home. Then he noticed something in the distance. A small house. One warm light glowing through the rain. He walked toward it and knocked. The door slowly opened. A woman stood there holding a lantern. The moment she saw his face, the color left hers. Her hand began to shake. She looked at him as if she had seen a ghost. And then she whispered, "Malik Dlamini?" Rain continued to fall outside. The woman stood at the doorway, holding the lantern tightly. Her eyes remained fixed on Malik. "You know my name?" he asked softly. For a moment, she did not answer. Then she stepped aside. "Come inside before the storm gets worse." The small house smelled of firewood and fresh bread. It was simple, wooden chairs, handmade baskets, and clay pots on the shelves. Very different from the luxury Malik had known all his life. "I don't have much," the woman said quietly, "but I can make tea." Malik nodded. He had not eaten since morning. A few hours earlier, he had been standing in a grand ballroom. Now he was sitting beside a small fire in a stranger's home. Life could change in a single day. The woman placed a bowl of vegetable soup before him. "My name is Amma," she said. "Thank you," Malik replied. She looked at him carefully. "You look tired." "I lost everything today." Amma's eyes filled with sadness, but she said nothing. As Malik looked around the room, his attention stopped on a photograph hanging on the wall. His heart nearly stopped. The picture showed a younger Amma standing beside an older man. That man was his father, the late Samuel Dlamini. Malik slowly stood up. "Where did you get this photograph?" Amma turned and saw where he was looking. Her face changed immediately. Without a word, she rushed over and removed the picture from the wall. "You knew my father?" Malik asked. "No," she said quickly. "But that's him." "You are mistaken." Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. Malik stared at her. She was hiding something. A few minutes later, Amma prepared a small bed for him near the fireplace. "You should rest," she said softly. Exhausted, Malik lay down. But sleep did not come easily. Sometime after midnight, he heard a sound. Crying. He quietly opened his eyes. Amma was sitting near the window, holding the old photograph. Tears rolled down her face. Then she whispered words that made his heart pound. After all these years, why did his son come here? Malik sat up slowly. The woman who had opened her door to a broken billionaire knew far more about his family than she had admitted. But who was she? And why was she afraid of his father's photograph? The next morning, the rain had stopped. Golden sunlight spread across the small village. Malik stepped outside Amma's house and froze. Near the entrance of the village stood a deep water well. On its side was a small metal plate. Donated by Samuel Dlamini. His father's name. Malik walked closer. His fingers touched the plate. A strange feeling filled his chest. That can't be, he whispered. A few steps away stood a small clinic with white walls and blue windows. Above its door was another sign, built with the support of Samuel Dlamini Foundation. More villagers began gathering around him. An old man smiled warmly. You have your father's eyes. Malik looked at him in surprise. You knew my father? The old man laughed softly. Knew him? This village would not exist without him. Another woman spoke. He brought water when our farms were dying. A farmer added. He paid for the clinic when sickness spread here. Everyone spoke of Samuel Dlamini with respect, almost like a hero. Malik could hardly breathe. He had managed his father's company for years. He had read every official report. None of these projects existed in company records. Not one. He turned toward Alma. You knew about this? Alma lowered her eyes. I know some things. Why were they hidden? She remained silent. The silence felt heavier than any answer. At that same moment, many miles away, a black SUV stopped near the edge of the village. Victor Dlamini stepped out. His expensive shoes sank slightly into the muddy ground. Two private investigators stood beside him. One handed him a folder. We found the village, sir. Victor looked toward the distant hills. His face grew cold. So this is where my uncle hid everything. He closed the folder. If the evidence is here, Malik's life is over. Back in the village, Elder Django approached Malik slowly. The elderly man carried a carved walking stick. He looked at Malik with deep emotion. I wondered if this day would ever come. Malik frowned. What day? The old man looked toward the giant baobab tree standing beyond the fields. Then he said quietly, the day Samuel Dlamini's son finally came to learn the truth. Malik's heart began to race. What truth? And why did everyone in this forgotten village seem to know his father better than he did? The afternoon sun hung low over the village as Elder Django slowly walked toward the giant baobab tree. Its thick branches spread across the land like ancient arms. Malik and Alma followed him in silence. The old man stopped beside the tree and placed his hand on its rough bark. For many years, he said softly, this tree protected a secret. He looked at Malik. A secret your father asked us to keep. Malik's heart began to pound. Elder Django bent down and moved several old stones near the roots. Beneath them was a small iron handle. Together, they pulled up a wooden box covered in dust. The box was locked. Alma reached into her pocket and removed an old brass key. Her hands were trembling. You had the key all this time? Malik asked. She did not answer. The lock clicked open. Inside were several leather journals, tied with a faded cloth. Malik slowly opened the first one. The handwriting belonged to his father. His hands began to shake. He turned the pages. Each entry listed money transfers. Large amounts. Dates. Village projects. Wells. Farms. The clinic. Everything. The money had come directly from company accounts. Malik's face turned pale. No, he whispered. He opened another journal. More transfers. More records. The evidence was undeniable. His father had secretly moved company money for years. Suddenly, the accusations against him no longer seemed impossible. The room inside his heart grew cold. The man he had admired his entire life. Had he really been stealing? Malik closed the journal and stared into the distance. This can't be true. Beside him, Alma suddenly covered her face. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked as though she had carried this pain for many years. I never wanted you to see it like this, she whispered. Malik turned toward her. You knew? Alma said nothing. Her silence felt like another betrayal. Then Elder Django reached deeper into the box. At the bottom lay a sealed envelope. The paper had turned yellow with age. On the front, written in Samuel Dlamini's hand, were the words, to my son. Malik carefully picked it up. Then he noticed another sentence written beneath it. His breath caught. The message read, do not open until you understand why I betrayed you. The wind suddenly swept through the branches of the baobab tree. Malik stared at the envelope. Betrayed him? What had his father done? And why had he left those terrifying words behind? The evening sky turned orange as Malik stood beneath the baobab tree, holding the envelope in his hands. For a long moment, he could not move. Then he slowly broke the seal. Inside was a single letter. The handwriting was his father's. Malik took a deep breath and began to read. Asterisk, my son, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally reached you. Asterisk. His hands trembled. Asterisk. Many years ago, a powerful mining company discovered valuable minerals beneath this village. They wanted the land. They offered money to the people, but the villagers refused to leave their homes. Asterisk. Malik looked up at Alma. She lowered her eyes. He continued reading. Asterisk. When they could not buy the land, they tried to force the people out. Wells were destroyed. Farms were threatened. I could not stand by and watch. Asterisk. The wind blew softly through the tree. Asterisk. I used company profits to protect this village. I built the wells, the clinic, and the farms. I knew one day people might call me a thief. If that happened, I was willing to carry that burden. Asterisk. Malik's eyes filled with tears. His father had not stolen money for himself. He had sacrificed his reputation to save others. The betrayal he believed in was actually an act of love. He slowly lowered the letter. Alma finally spoke. I begged your father to let me help him. Malik looked at her. For years, we kept this secret. We promised that this village would survive. Tears rolled down her cheeks. We never imagined it would destroy your life too. For the first time since arriving in the village, Malik saw her pain. She had carried this burden for years. Then something caught his attention. He looked back inside the box. There was an empty space between the journals. A page was missing. He quickly checked the final notebook. The last page had been carefully torn out. Not years ago. Recently. The edges were still clean. Someone had removed it. Malik's heart began to race. Who took this page? He whispered. Alma's expression suddenly changed. She looked frightened. Then Elder Django slowly stepped forward. Before he could speak, a distant engine echoed across the fields. A vehicle was approaching the village, and someone inside it already knew exactly what was hidden beneath the baobab tree. The sound of the engine grew louder. A black SUV stopped near the baobab tree. The door opened. Victor Dlamini stepped out. He looked tired, angry, and strangely heartbroken. Malik stared at him in surprise. Victor? You followed me here. Victor's eyes moved from Malik to the wooden box. So it's true, he said quietly. Everything was hidden here. The villagers watched in silence. Malik stepped forward. You framed me. Victor laughed bitterly. No, Malik. The truth framed you. He looked toward the clinic in the distance. My father gave everything to help your father protect this village. Malik frowned. What are you talking about? Victor's face hardened. My father was your father's business partner. He signed documents, approved payments, and defended those secret projects. He paused. When people started asking questions, he took the blame. The wind blew across the fields. He lost his position. He lost his reputation. Victor's voice began to shake. And when he became sick, he believed your father had abandoned him. Malik could barely speak. You never told me this. You never knew, Victor replied. Because your family buried the truth. His eyes filled with anger. My father died believing he had been sacrificed for nothing. For a moment, his voice broke. I hated the Dlamini name after that. Malik looked at his cousin and saw something unexpected. Not greed. Pain. Years of pain. I didn't steal the money because I wanted it, Victor said. I wanted the world to hate your family the way I hated it. Silence fell. Even Alma looked shocked. Then Elder Django slowly stepped forward. There is something else you must know. Everyone turned toward him. The old man looked at Alma. The missing page from the journal. He stopped. Alma lowered her head. It was taken by her. Malik's eyes widened. The villagers gasped softly. Victor looked confused. Elder Django continued. Samuel trusted Alma with that page many years ago. The world seemed to stop around Malik. He slowly turned toward her. She did not deny it. Tears filled her eyes. You had it all this time? He asked. Alma's hands trembled. I never wanted this day to come. Malik took a step toward her. Everything she had done suddenly felt different. The photograph. The secret. The missing page. The tears. He looked at her in disbelief and whispered, What are you still hiding? The sun had almost disappeared behind the hills. The village was quiet. Only the sound of the wind moved through the branches of the baobab tree. Alma slowly reached into her bag. Her hands were shaking. She removed a folded piece of paper. The missing journal page. For years, she had protected it. Now she placed it in Malik's hands. You deserve the truth, she said softly. Malik unfolded the page. At the top was his father's handwriting. He began to read. Asterisk, if anything happens to me, this promise must never be broken. Asterisk. Below the words were two names. Samuel Dlamini and Daniel and Jerry. Amma's late husband. Malik looked up in confusion. What is this? Amma took a deep breath. Many years ago, our families saved each other during very difficult times. She looked toward the village. There was sickness, poverty, and men who wanted this land. Your father and my husband stood together. Tears filled her eyes. They made a sacred family covenant. Victor frowned. A covenant. Amma nodded. It was an old traditional promise. A symbolic marriage alliance between families. Malik looked confused. But there was no marriage. No, she replied gently. It was never about romance. She touched the paper. It was a promise that both families would protect each other, no matter the cost. Silence filled the air. My husband died only a year later, Amma continued. Before he passed away, he made me swear that I would honor the covenant. She looked directly at Malik. That is why I stayed in this village. That is why I protected your father's secret. And that is why I hid this page. Malik's voice became quiet. Why hide it from me? Amma's eyes filled with tears. Because the page names me as the guardian of the covenant. She lowered her head. I was afraid people would think I wanted your family's money. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Malik looked again at the page. Everything suddenly made sense. The photograph, the tears, the years of silence. Amma had never protected wealth. She had protected a promise. The greatest secret was not an inheritance. It was loyalty and sacrifice. Malik slowly looked at her. For the first time, he truly understood the burden she had carried. But as he turned the page over, he noticed something unexpected. There was one final sentence written at the bottom. A sentence no one had mentioned. Malik's expression changed. Slowly, he raised his eyes toward Amma. What does this part mean? The next morning, the entire village gathered beneath the great baobab tree. The first rays of sunlight touched the old branches. Men and women stood quietly, waiting. In the center stood Malik. In his hands were his father's journals. Beside him stood Amma and Elder Django. A few steps away stood Victor, his face heavy with regret. Malik looked at the villagers and took a deep breath. For days, I believed my father had betrayed our family. He held up one of the journals. But these pages tell a different story. He explained how his father had secretly protected the village, built the wells and clinic, and honored the sacred covenant between the two families. Silence filled the air. Then Malik opened the final journal. Inside was one last letter. He looked at Victor. This part is for you. Victor frowned. Malik began to read. Asterisk, if anything happens to me, continue helping my brother, Elias. He sacrificed everything for our promise. Make sure his family is never abandoned. Asterisk. Victor's eyes widened. Elias. His father. Malik continued reading. Asterisk. I have arranged for his medical care and financial support. He must never know it comes from me, because his pride would not allow him to accept it. Asterisk. The paper trembled in Malik's hands. Victor looked as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. No, he whispered. Tears filled his eyes. My father believed Samuel forgot him. Elder Django stepped forward. He never forgot him. Every month, help came to your family in secret. Victor's face broke. All those years of anger, all those years of hatred, had been built on a lie. He slowly sank to his knees. I destroyed your life, he said to Malik. And your father was trying to save mine. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Malik walked toward him. Victor lowered his head, expecting anger. Instead, Malik placed a hand on his shoulder. We both lost our way. Victor looked up, stunned. I forgive you. The villagers watched in silence. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Then Malik turned to Amma. My father gave this village hope. He looked around at the people gathered beneath the tree. I want to rebuild his foundation. Not for money. For his promise. He smiled softly. And I cannot do it alone. The villagers began to clap. The sound echoed across the fields. As everyone slowly walked away, the sun rose higher above the village. Malik looked at Amma. Would you help me keep our family's promise alive? Amma smiled through tears. And for the first time since losing everything, Malik felt that he had finally found something far more valuable than wealth. The truth.